Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Crystal.
Welcome back to the Mothers of All Crime. We're going to be picking up where we left off with the Gabby Petito docuseries part 2, Investigation.
Yes. So in the last episode, we kind of ended off where Gabby had gone missing. Her family had been trying to contact her and Brian's family and not getting any responses. They had filed a police report, a missing persons report, and in Northport, Florida on August 11th, wow, September 11th. I really want to have this and be in August apparently.
You're trying to wrap it up quicker.
I am. September 11th, 2021, police officers were sent to Brian's family home where the parents did answer. They refused to talk to the police. They did say that Brian was home, also would refuse, and any questions could be had to their attorney that they had already retained. Um, with that being said, Brian was there, the van was there, and the van is fully in Gabby's name, which is important because at that point it allowed the police to tow the van and start really looking in that investigation because the fact that they're talking to them like, hey, the parents just want like reassurance that their kid is okay and these people are being completely uncooperative really started throwing those flags up for the police. So that kind of launched this investigation, joint investigation.
So I had a thought earlier and I was trying to find an answer for it. And I've seen this on, it's not just my thought, I guess, because I've seen it on TikTok and Reddit as well. And I didn't really find anything that satisfied it. But couldn't he have been arrested for Grand Theft Auto at that point because he had her car?
I don't know because in you know how you can have like an authorized driver from like insurance
Mm,
perspectives? The car hadn't been reported as stolen. So you can't
right.
steal something that someone hasn't reported. I think if
Mm,
there was some kind of report from Gabby saying like my van is missing and someone took it, then yes. But just because her van is in someone else's possession, I don't think that qualifies. I could be wrong,
okay.
but
I mean, that's pretty much what I was picking up as well, but I just thought that would have been a way to get him
it would have been
into
nice.
custody. Yeah. Yeah. But he's, firmly standing with his constitutional right not to speak. So
Yeah.
that's,
I
yeah.
think their hope with the van was there was going to be something incriminating inside of it that they could see in plain sight. Because we have the body cam footage, which I really liked that they incorporated. They're peeking in the van as
Mm,
much as they can. And they told the guy who towed it to not go inside it if possible. And he's like, yeah, no problem. So they were able to keep the integrity of the inside intact without contamination from like officers or the tow truck company. So when they did, God forbid, if they did go in and there was like a massacre inside, it would have been preserved. So that didn't happen, but it was a starting point that the police were given.
that's true. That makes sense. It's potential evidence for sure.
Right. And this was a joint investigation between them and the department in New York where Gabby's family was. And her dad actually, because of this distance, flew down to Florida and in person to put himself there and had a press conference. And I think from here it became like a national incident. Like it spread. And I think having the dad, in my opinion, doing that press conference really brought her to life. It's not just an officer standing on the screen talking where you can kind of like not connect. You saw like the emotion and the pain in his father's face, which I think helped people start to really step in and
It,
look for
I think
Gabby.
I think that definitely happens in missing persons cases where it's obviously sad and upsetting if someone is missing, but if they're desperately missed by their family, by their friends, people are showing a lot of emotion and they have a lot of desperation. I think that people have empathy for that and can see themselves in that situation, and it makes her more relatable, and it makes
Mhm.
other parents think, wow, I have a 22-year-old or whatever, and if this was my daughter, if this was my kid, if this situation was like this would be gutting.
Right.
So I think that people were able to relate to her and relate to him, and they could see themselves in her family. Also, the body cam footage being released was huge, and that definitely caused a media sensation. There's a lot of attention to that. So
Yeah.
I agree. It was good to include in the documentary for sure. It's a big deal.
Do you remember yourself seeing stuff? Because I don't, at this point
Yeah.
in the investigation, I don't remember seeing anything quite yet. I saw stuff later on, which I'll mention when it comes, but I hadn't seen anything yet. Did you see stuff yet?
Yeah, I definitely did, but I watch a lot of like YouTube and TikTok true crime things, and I remember this cycling and seeing the body cam footage and thinking the whole situation was bizarre, and then it just got more bizarre. So I did follow it in real time when it was happening.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll mention when I discovered it in real time. But
Oh, okay.
um so obviously her last known location was out west. So her parents, her step parents, the four of them
Pers-
really started making a lot of noise. They were calling departments and putting up posters and websites and news. And her stepdad actually flew out to Wyoming to meet with the sheriff's department as like the in person for that area. So they really
Right,
had parents in each of the main locations, which I think was really smart. And she's lucky that she had that family dynamic to do that. So he was that
right.
representative for the family, which again pushes the this is a real person kind of vibe to people. And it's a lot harder to ignore a human being in your office than the emails and the phone calls that sometimes
Yeah,
happen.
definitely. And he was, boots on the ground, getting involved in the search teams. He was physically looking for her as well and working with the police in the state. And it was clearly a big effort put on by all four of her parents. And yeah, it's heartbreakingly sad, but I do think in a tough situation like this, it is better to show up and be as involved as possible, because you're not going to get brushed aside
Right.
and forgotten about.
And not to mention, the area that they were looking was Teton or Tenton or however you pronounce
Grand
it,
Teton,
Grand
I think,
Teton.
or
Uh,
Teton.
the national forest is
Right.
massive. So
Hmm.
having to search over this terrain, they had horseback, they had dogs, they had search parties, walking, drones. Like they really brought all the options out to try and
Yeah.
get over this wilderness. And the FBI actually ended up getting involved as well.
Yes, they did. And they stayed involved for a long time because of all the events that are to come.
Yeah.
Got very complicated. It's sort of I loved how they presented it in the documentary, because they were showing things in chronological order but also adding details when they were important. Um and I think we're around September 17th at this point, where there's a welfare call made, which I'd never actually heard the welfare call before. And we could talk about it in a minute, but a welfare call was made basically saying that Brian needed to be checked on because he may have OD'd. So the cops go to the Laundrie residence and they say, "Oh, yeah, he's been missing for days. He went camping, he never came back."
I
And my jaw drops every time.
yeah,
Like,
loss
how
of
did he get
words.
out of the house?
Because what I think also is important is not only do you have like police kind of checking in on the house, but there are protesters outside of this home at this point. Like normal
All the time,
civilian people,
protesters.
completely unrelated to the case, protesting outside his house and the sister's house. And again, it's not a quiet area. And during this time, I also thought was interesting. The sister ended up talking to, I don't know if it was a news person or just one of the
Mm,
protesters or whoever it was, that she also didn't have contact with her family, which felt a little bizarre because at the beginning it was this that I kind of thought, okay, well, she probably knows as much as the parents do. And at this point, I'm thinking the sister doesn't have any clue what's going on, and other than to be told to be quiet. Don't talk to anybody.
So with Cassie, I go back and forth about what she knew and what she didn't know.
Right?
I
Yeah.
think she made a lot of assumptions, and maybe they didn't confirm things to her because it could implicate her and just create more problems. So on the parents' end and even on Brian's end, I could understand not wanting to give her a lot of details. But
Mm-hmm.
I think she knew more than she would say, which also I do think is somewhat understandable. But I do have a note here from what she said in that interview. That she's also very devastated because she's losing her parents, her brother, and her future sister-in-law all at once.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very odd.
Yeah.
I
That
mean, at
whole
that point, Brian
interaction
wasn't
was
missing.
odd.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's like I paired it with that. So here's why I think that specifically is important is this welfare check that he apparently OD'd. How do you know that someone OD'd
Mm,
inside of a house that
right.
you haven't been in? Like it had to have,
Right.
in my thoughts, it had to have been someone who knew the family, but obviously not his parents because his parents would never do that. But
Right.
I wonder if it was like her husband who called because
I thought about that too.
all of a sudden, like now the sister is being cut out completely and no one's talking to her. I don't know. Because it seems weird otherwise. I mean, it could have just been like a prank call, like to get the police into the house by like a civilian of like, that's the only way to get them in. I don't know. It just felt weird.
I do think that it could have very well been someone that knew. I was thinking maybe Cassie husband as well. The voice didn't super sound like him, but the voice also didn't sound concerned, I didn't think.
Right. It was
They were
very
kind of saying it in a
nonchalant.
very very blasé, if you will. And that's not how I would call and express my concerns that someone has overdosed. And so it makes me think that it's either someone who's not involved that is trolling, that wants to have more police attention at the Laundrie house, which is possible, or it's an insider in the Laundrie family who either is genuinely concerned about Brian or is trying to blow up their spot.
Yeah. And well, either way, he did not OD. Surprise.
Right. Right.
Spoiler. But he was
Right.
missing. And
Missing.
I I do want to mention that like with it, the parents did state that Brian would go out camping a couple days at a time. They wouldn't hear from him because he'd go like off grid and come back. Like this wasn't an abnormal thing. So
Right.
when the police showed up and they're like, "Oh, he's been missing for days." The first couple days to them wasn't odd. I think it had just now got to a
Mm.
point of now he's been gone even longer than normal. At least
Well,
that's
I
how
mean,
I took it.
that's their story for
True.
sure.
Yeah.
But it's odd to me that it wasn't mentioned until someone says that he's overdosed.
Right, which is why I'm like, it's got to be someone who's inside knowing that like he wasn't there and he hadn't been there
Mm.
for a while.
Mm. Yeah. I wonder if it was a neighbor that was maybe doing their own surveillance and just noticed that Brian didn't appear to be there.
Because the family was going on with their life. So like Brian would be
Yeah.
seen here and there and his parents were still like going out and doing their thing. So it's like you wonder maybe it was a neighbor and they just noticed that he hadn't walked outside in a while. But then wouldn't you have noticed like his car's not there either. Like it's not just him.
I, I think that it could have been someone that had a genuine reason to think that Brian wasn't there, or maybe that he did overdose. I don't know if he had any history of substance abuse. I couldn't find anything that said that, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence of that. But I wonder if, with all of the media attention, people were worried.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sticking with Cassie's husband personally, but
Okay.
I have nothing to
I
back
could
that up.
it's alleged for sure.
Yes.
Alleged.
Yes.
Probably a great guy, but it could have been him. I agree.
But either way, that also started to spark some flags. And
Ooh, yeah.
I think that also took the turn of he is missing, and then, okay, is he also like weird, but is he on the run or is he not okay? Like, what's happening with Brian now? Because now you have two
Right.
missing people, and you can't really charge Brian without Gabby, if that is the case. So they
Right.
really doubled down on trying to find Gabby and where Gabby was.
And you definitely can't charge Brian without Brian. So this is
Right.
a double missing persons case. And because this was on the media, it started to attract a lot of attention. And that's when people on TikTok, on Instagram, on social media are realizing that they maybe have had interactions with Brian Laundrie. And so
Mhm.
witnesses are coming forward to say, he was hitchhiking. I saw him. I have this weird picture. This is probably him. And it's kind of helping put a timeline together.
Yeah, they were saying that there was 2 to 300 tips a day coming in.
Right. And
And
most of them were not credible,
right.
obviously. But
I
there
was
were a couple.
gonna say, like, that's the one problem when you open it to the public to give tips is the majority of what you get is garbage.
Right.
However, when you do get something, it tends to be gold. So they had a couple times where someone like picked him up hitchhiking so they could locate,
Mm-hmm.
okay, Brian was here during roughly this time. And there were other van vloggers with footage of where the van was parked
Mm-hmm.
in like a different spot. So they started taking all these different pieces and putting together a more accurate timeline on that day for them. And okay, so Gabby's last physical footage of her on a camera was that Whole Foods. All right, then they
Right.
went where? So you have, okay, we drove by the van. He hitchhiked, I think, with two separate people, if I remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he mentioned that his fiance was waiting for him to them.
Again, he's the only one who calls her fiance, but
Do you
I
think
still
that's
I think it's
significant?
so weird. Like,
It's
I
weird.
don't know. But yeah, so each time it was, oh, you can drop me off here and I'll walk because my fiance is waiting for me. And one of the women who picked him up, kind of in the moment, she was talking about, she's like, in the moment, I didn't think it was weird. I kind of like made a joke about what you don't want your fiance seeing some woman drop you off. She's like, and then she's like, it felt weird, but I didn't think anything of it. And then now that she's seeing him on the news, she's like, now I kind of understand. Oh, okay, maybe something else was going on. So it's so interesting listening to like the after fact. Like, oh, that's probably
Oh,
why he was being weird. Like,
absolutely. I mean, the terror of looking in hindsight at who you picked up in your car also probably shouldn't pick up hitchhikers. It's very nice, but probably not a good idea almost ever.
yeah. I mean, it used to be super normal and it's probably a very regional thing.
Sure, but
Um,
this is 2021 we're talking about. Don't pick up a man in your
yeah.
car while you're a woman driving alone in the woods. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That is not a good idea. And I don't want
Yeah.
to, freak anybody out, but I definitely do not recommend that anyone does that. Um yeah. So, yeah, crazy. So the people who did see him and the people who did see the van helped kind of narrow down the area to look in and the timeline of what probably happened.
Yeah, so they zoned into the Spread Creek area of the park and they were able to kind of take that tens of thousands of acres, 100,000 acres, whatever it was, to a much more tangible area. And there were a lot of floods and a lot of rain. So you had people doing searches in like waist deep, chest deep water. The dogs could only do so much because they were getting attacked by alligators, which I thought was wild.
Oh, but that's in Florida we're talking about, right? We're not talking about Wyoming.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just talking like all of the searching different like
Yeah.
areas.
I would love to
And
know what they spent on these search. I mean, it was
oh,
extensive. It
it's
was
crazy.
crazy.
The manpower,
Weeks of
like
searching.
they definitely took volunteers.
Mhm.
Which part of me I was like so ready for them to have a Wyoming volunteer and have it be Brian. I was so ready. I don't know why. I just felt like he was that toxic that he'd be like, "I'll help search. It wouldn't be
Oh.
me." Like, I don't know why. Or like one of his parents. I was so ready for that to come. It did not
R-
come, but I
Returning to the
was
scene,
so
though, I could
ready.
see it. So, sadly, they did. Well, also, it
It was
good and
bittersweet.
bad,
Yeah.
bittersweet. They found Gabby, and she was laying on her side. She was wrapped in a sweater. She was very decomposed, but she was not skeletonized. She'd clearly been there for weeks, and her poor stepdad identified the body and had to tell her mom and her dad and her stepmom that they found the body.
Yeah, so they found the body on September 19th, and the investigator described it as a unnatural position, and the stepdad described it basically her laying in the fetal position esque. And to the investigator, he kind of determined that that was very staged. Um, there were burn marks on the ground from someone trying to make a fire next to her, but no fire making stuff. Her boots were just like very nicely placed, and it felt wrong. And I cannot imagine being the stepdad having to then make the call, because it's one
Ugh.
thing to have a picture sent to your phone identifying your stepchild or really his daughter,
Ugh.
but then having to have a conference call with your spouse, her mother, her father, her stepmother, like all of these people to tell them the worst option, which I think is something in the back of their head. They knew it was a
Yeah.
possibility, but it's never something you actually want to hear.
As long as she's missing, even if it's very unlikely, the hope remains
Yeah.
that maybe she is alive somewhere. And when you find the body, it provides closure, but it also means that she's definitely gone
Yeah.
and there's no fixing the situation.
I do really appreciate though that they made it a priority to inform the families and protect the scene and Gabby's integrity and her
Hmm.
decency. They did a really nice job of like making sure all that was done prior to the national news finding out. Um, which is where I suddenly found this case. um,
This is where
I
you
found
come in.
out, I had watched the news of her body being discovered and the aerial footage of the crime scene and okay, now we're going after Brian to charge him. Where is Brian? Um, so that's where I came in kind of like concerned. I'm like, okay, there's this manhunt for this person in Florida who killed someone in Wyoming. Like it was a very interesting random one that again went crazy on the media, on social media. It just everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. It was a huge story before, but a confirmed murder amps it up substantially.
And all of this happened relatively quickly. Like considering the time it takes to do investigations in general, this case
Right.
was investigated and her body was found relatively quickly, all things considered.
I mean, it probably felt like torture for the Petito family, but it really was only 8 days.
Yeah.
From filing the missing persons report to her body being recovered, it was 8 days.
Yeah. And they kind of determined that she was probably killed on August, finally have the right month, uh
Hmm.
27th ish was where they narrowed it down. And
Yeah. I think between the 27th and the 29th, definitely. But it
yeah.
could have, yeah, it was definitely in that range.
Oh yeah, cuz they're not going to know exactly because
Yeah.
of the time
The
frame and
decomposition
decomp
also.
and the nature.
Right. The
um,
exposure to the elements is a huge factor in this case, and the decomposition,
yeah,
it affects all the
and
evidence.
because they looked at her, the last evidence that they could find to confirm that she was alive was at 8:23 on the 27th when she was moving files around on her computer,
Mm-hmm.
and they were video files that she was editing, and that's the only reason that I'm like, okay, it most likely was probably Gabby because she was the only one who was editing anything.
Right.
So that confirmed it. But after that, everything, it was radio silence, computer, phone, everything.
Yeah. I
So
mean, yeah.
their guess was that she was killed roughly sometime after that, and then her body was moved to where they found it.
Right. Which is very, very disturbing to think about. Um, Another disturbing thing that comes out at this point in the documentary is the call records from the end of August, specifically August 29th, where there's a 55-minute call from Brian to his mom. And then that's the day a lawyer is retained for Brian.
Mm-hmm. And there was calls back and forth um,
And
between
text
her
going to Gabby's
parent.
phone.
Yeah, so he was calling back and forth between his parents and himself. And there was that weird text, if people remember, that
Mm-hmm.
her mom got about Stan.
Right.
Now, looking at that timeline, it is assumed that Brian was actually the one who sent that text. And then he started texting back and forth between his phone and Gabby's phone to like make it seem like they were having a conversation and, oh, I miss you and I'll see you soon. And again, establishing an out, like he was aware enough of what was going on to start creating his alibi. If that was
Yes.
him, if that was his advice he was given, we will never know. But
We will not know.
either way, you're calm enough to do this.
Right. So August 30th is the last text from Gabby's phone, and that's to her mom, Nicole. And it says, no service in Yosemite, which does a couple of things, right? It provides a different location than where they actually are. They're not in Yosemite, they're in Grand Teton.
Mm-hmm.
They also, he's telling her mom that she doesn't have service. So when her mom is trying to call and text, or other people in her life are trying to call and text, if she's not responding, it provides some time and distance because you're going to presume, like, oh, she'll get back to me when she has service. So laying the groundwork for giving himself some time, basically.
Right. And at that point, he started his drive back to Florida, which
Mm-hmm.
very casual. Got in the car. He used Gabby's debit card periodically for gas and food, and again, establishing that she's with him. And one thing that I thought was both ridiculous, but also like I see the thought process is he zelled $700 from Gabby to Brian with
Mm-hmm.
the caption of "Goodbye, Brian. I'll never ask for anything again." And I thought that was a interesting tactic because she had already mentioned to her mom, like, "Oh, if I buy out him,
Mm-hmm.
I can go solo travel," which my assumption is with the way he had seemed to be behaving, he probably had been reading her texts and all of that stuff. So he knew that this was a conversation she had had.
Right.
By doing that, it could be, oh, well, she went off and did her thing, and here's the money for it to prove that she went off and did her solo adventure.
Right. I mean, he clearly had her phone, had access to everything in it, including her banking apps. So he probably read all of her text messages and was shaping the narrative around that. Also, I don't think he had any money. So I think he was looking to get every last penny he could out of her.
Yeah. And Gabby's family had been sending her money periodically. Um and I think that's probably most of what she had would be my assumption. But again, we have no idea
Yeah, and
if it
her
was all
Taco
her
Bell
money or
money,
no
I
money.
guess.
Yeah, her Taco Bell. Um this is where, in my opinion, if I was a murderer,
Which you're not, for the
I'm
record.
not, for the record. I if I was gonna do this, you send that Zelle. I would probably find some state park somewhere or something and leave the van, fly home. Sorry, I don't know where she went. I don't. She paid me for the
Right.
van. She went off and did her thing. Like, it wouldn't be the first time that Brian flew home and left Gabby by herself somewhere.
That's true.
So,
He'd done it very recently.
yeah.
Like,
So,
he
like,
clearly could do it again.
why wouldn't you just leave the van? Like,
And if he had left the van somewhere else, completely not connected to where her body was, it would have been way harder for anyone to find it.
they might never. Not, I do think with the way that her parents handled it, they would have eventually, but they might not. Like, there is that chance that it would have been just enough different. Like, if he left it in Texas or something,
Right.
it it was possible to figure out a way around it. He drove it to his parents' house and parked it in the driveway. Like, not
Which makes me think the lawyer was not giving him that advice, because I have a hard time believing that that was the advice, like the legal advice. But I think that maybe he was paranoid to get on a plane or something like that,
right.
which is silly because no one's looking for you yet.
Right.
And it would have definitely been smarter for him to drive somewhere else, ditch the van, call his parents, say, Gabby and I got in a fight. She bought me out of the van. Can I come home? Can you help me get a plane ticket? And
Done.
then when the cops knock on the door, you say, oh my God, what do you mean? She was
Right.
totally fine. She was mad at me, but she was fine.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
that was not his
Plausible
decision.
deniability.
Just
No.
saying. Would have been my guess.
I don't think he thought things through. I also don't think the lawyer knew the extent of the situation, or he was not listening to his advice, because I have a hard time believing that you would drive
I
a van
think,
full of evidence across the country with you.
yeah. I think the advice would have been coming from his parents, not the attorney.
Right.
Because an attorney
It's like,
can't
what?
tell you advice on how to get away with a crime. But
For sure. Yeah.
I think his parents probably were giving him advice that he was listening to, plus his
Mhm.
own creativity.
Yeah.
But either way, at this point, he's now, like, he officially became a federal fugitive as of September 22nd, and the hunt was on. And the FBI alone was getting over 4,000 tips a day for him and where he was. Like, everyone got
So
involved.
crazy. And I think the charge was just debit card fraud at first, because that's really all they could
I
prove.
don't know. So, I will say, and they vaguely mentioned it in the documentary, is like they're always going to undercharge it first because they want to get their ducks in a row. So, my guess is they probably did that first while they were processing evidence, gathering, having the lab do stuff.
Right. I
One
mean,
thing
it
that
took a while to get the autopsy back.
yeah,
Also.
exactly. Like, that had to be done. Like, it's not going to happen overnight.
Right.
But like, Dog the Bounty Hunter got involved, which I think is kind of
I
like
know. Dog
like,
gets involved in a lot of because he was involved in Casey Anthony, that stuff too. He gets
I
really
know.
in there with these high profile cases.
And partially I think it's because it's high profile. He's gotta like he's getting older and he doesn't do as extreme stuff, so like that's how he keeps relevant. But I also really
Yeah.
loved it. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it was a blast from the past to see him.
Yeah,
He
for
looked good.
sure. Yeah, listen, he also has a lot of resources and he's got funds, and I think
Yeah, and he'll
it
throw his
helped.
funds around. You
Yeah,
know, if it's going to get
100%.
him media coverage, which it did, he's going to throw a lot of resources at a case that needed it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, more power to him. I think that, because at that point they're still looking for Brian.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And this is
he was very confident that he would
yeah.
find.
He's like, I got this. He watches me.
Mhm.
Like, no,
Mhm.
I don't think he has anything to
Oh,
back that
yeah.
up. But he's like, he
No,
probably is my fan.
probably not, because Brian was like a 23-year-old guy who probably had never
A
even heard of
crunchy
Dog the Bounty
guy.
Hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah, crunchy, super crunchy. Yeah, for sure.
Um, But this is
But the
where that.
autopsy. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. Ah, I was gonna say this
No,
was
no, no, it's
my
okay.
waist deep search party that I mentioned before.
Right.
There was a lot of natural elements happening and a lot of weather impacting this specific search that again had to have had a lot of resources being put to it.
Right. And this is where the gators are, which had to make everything extremely terrifying. I cannot imagine wading through chest deep water knowing there's alligators in it.
Nope.
Ah,
Yeah, and there was like
Florida freaks me
20,000
out.
acres that they were searching. And the
Right.
park had, oh, we should mention that it was in a park. Um
Right.
they had found the car he had driven at one of his favorite parks that had been there for a while. It got ticketed. Um and the park was closed because of all that rain. And so it was one of those, I'm like, all right, if he's out there, he was out there while the park was closed. So he had time to do whatever he needed to do or go as far as he wants to. 20,000 acres is a lot of territory.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah. Which makes it even odder how things ended up,
Mm-hmm.
because after the park is finally reopened because the weather improves, which after Brian's been missing for 37 days, October 20th, 2021, his parents start searching. And this is the first time that they've been there to search because the park has previously been closed. And within 1 hour of them being there, they find his waterproof book bag. And then about 30 minutes after that, they find his skeleton. His mom and dad found his skeleton within 2 hours of searching after almost 4 weeks of the FBI and volunteers and the police
Yeah,
searching.
professionals can't find you,
Right.
but 2 hours within, what did they say, like a mile of where
It was,
his car
yeah.
was?
Mm-hmm.
You're right. They definitely wouldn't have checked there. Like, come on.
Definitely not. Right. So, pretty odd. So, they find his book bag that has a waterproof notebook, which also seems like a very handy thing to write on in this kind of situation where you're going to be in a flooded park.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have the note. It's pretty long that he wrote that's in there. I don't know if you want me to read the whole thing.
Do you have a snippet of the part you think is big?
I mean, I have literally the whole thing, but I could just say the gist of it if you don't want to read the whole thing, because it is pretty rambly.
Yeah, I feel like it rambles. Give me a little tidbit here and there in the gist.
Okay, so he starts it addressed to Gabby. I wish I was right at your side. I wish I could be talking to you right now. I'd be going through every memory we'd made, getting even more excited for the future. I can't live without you. It goes on like that for a long time, where he's basically saying that she was the love of his life and they had all of these crazy memories together. They were all so great.
That
And
love bombing
then
we mentioned. Yep,
a
love,
lot of
love,
love
love.
bombing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, apologizing to her family, apologizing to his family, saying that everyone is grieving because they all loved Gabby so much and they all loved him so much. And then there's a bizarre description, which I think I may read this part. They loved as much, if not more than me. A new daughter to my mother, an aunt to my nephews. Please do not make this harder for them. This occurred as an unexpected tragedy. Rushing back to our car to cross the streams of Spread Creek before it got too dark to see, too cold. I hear a splash and heavily gasping my name. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I hear a splash and a scream. I could barely see. I couldn't find her for a moment. Shouted her name. I found her breathing, heavily gasping my name. She was freezing cold. We had just come from the blazing hot national parks in Utah. The temperature had dropped to freezing and she was soaking wet. I carried her as far as I could down the stream towards the car, stumbling, exhausted, in shock. When my knees buckled and knew I couldn't safely carry her, I started a fire and spooned her as close to the heat. She was so thin and already been freezing too long. I couldn't at the time start the fire, but I just wanted her out of the cold. Blah, 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 blah. So when I pulled Gabby out of the water, she couldn't tell me what hurt. She had a small bump on her forehead that eventually got larger. Her feet hurt, her wrist hurt, but she was freezing, shaking violently. While carrying her, she continually made sounds of pain. Laying next to her, and she said, little time lapsing between violent shakes. It's just this whole description of her gasping in pain and him saying that he ended her suffering. He took away her pain in an act of mercy. And the moment he did that, he knew he could not live without her.
Which the autopsy report did come back and said that Gabby died by her cause of death with homicide as a result of blunt force trauma and manual strangulation.
Mm-hmm.
So if we take his letter, we'll start there and take it for what his version is. She slipped on a rock, hit her head, fell into the stream, and like, I don't know, got pulled under and broke all her bones. And he took her out and ended up strangling her because she was in so much pain. As a mercy? Is that's how I took his version?
I think that's what he's saying. To
His
me,
version?
hard to imagine. Several elements of it are hard to imagine. It's so freezing cold that all of a sudden the water is extremely cold, and all of a sudden she's so injured and she's shaking so violently that this is the only solution.
And not to mention, I get that like they had been hiking all day and totally get it. But like he wasn't exactly in bad shape. And she wasn't exactly a large girl. Like you're telling me
she
you
was
couldn't have like
super tiny.
threw her on your back and moseyed your way over?
I feel like I'm really, really fixating on the weather, but it's the end of August.
So I just Googled it because I did the same thing and I hadn't looked it up before. In August in Teton National Park, the daily high temperatures are about 80 degrees, 75 to 80. And the average lowest temperature is 40 to 44.
Cold but not freezing.
Right. Like if you're wet in 40-degree weather, you're not a happy camper, but you'll live.
You don't need a mercy killing.
Like
From a bump on, she had a bump on her head and you mercy killed her?
And
Why couldn't he just keep walking to get the car?
Go get some help. Call someone. Like, again, I can only imagine you're probably in a very remote area, but there's park rangers. There's people who are literally their job is to come save you if you get hurt in these parks. People get hurt all the time. So you have to mercy kill her because there was an injury that happened? Sir.
What doesn't make sense to me is he was eventually able to get back to the van, get back to their phones, contact people, and so it's like you could have still done that at the time. There's no difference. There's no element that changed where you suddenly can now walk to get help. You could have done that because you called your mom for 55 minutes. So,
and let's also remember the quote unquote burn marks. So he is telling the truth that he tried to light some kind of fire. But you were also in a park. You're telling me you lit this fire and there's absolutely nothing there to make it larger?
I want to read the last paragraph of this though, because I find it so infuriating that he wrote this. I rushed home to spend any time I had left with my family. I wanted to drive north and let James or TJ, Gabby's dads, kill me, but I wouldn't want them to spend time in jail over my mistake. even though I'm sure they would have liked to. I'm ending my life not because of fear of punishment, but rather because I can't stand to live another day without her. I've lost out on our whole future together, every moment we could have cherished. I'm sorry for everyone's losses. Please do not make life harder for my family. They lost a son and a daughter, the most wonderful girl in the world. Gabby, I'm so sorry. I have killed myself by this creek in the hopes that the animals may tear me apart, that it makes some of her family happy. Please pick up all of my things. Gabby hated people who litter.
And it was determined he committed suicide by gunshot to his head.
Yeah. Right. Which
Did we ever find? So, to my understanding, they also never found the gun.
that's my understanding as well.
They
That they
found
found this bag of stuff,
right.
but that wasn't actually with his body. And his
Well,
body had clothes, I guess, with it a little bit. It was
yeah,
mostly just bones, though.
right. And him decaying, because I think they said he was discovered on October 22nd because the park had been closed for a bit. So, yeah, he had been there for a while. If in theory he had gone out the day a couple days before the welfare check. So decomposure probably would have happened with all of the animals and the rain, and he was submerged. Yeah, all right. But completely just bones feels
I know.
like a lot. I again don't know much about decomposition. We've done a little bit of research on it for another case, but it still feels like a lot. And this bag of stuff was in again water. It assumes that it moves, but you would think that at that point we're going to start searching for the gun, because obviously, like, if you shoot yourself in the head, you can't like put it back in the bag, like.
Right.
And a lot of animals, a lot of water, probably is a good place for it to go missing in a swamp.
Sure.
But it just still also, you find all this other stuff, but you don't find that. It just feels bizarre.
Yes, I agree. And I have a lot of thoughts about Brian's actions, his family's actions. I don't know if we want to save some of that for part 3, because I feel like I'm going to go on like a little tirade. But I mean,
Yeah. Well, I think part 3 is a really good, this might be a good place to stop then, because we have a lot of questions. We also have a civil wrongful death suit that gets filed,
right.
and some legislation action that the Petito family gets involved in that is really Gabby motivated and trying to help other people and change the way that the world works. Um, so that's all going to be coming in episode 3. But before we start that, do you have any final thoughts up in the investigation or the disappearance, anything up until this point?
I feel like not probably without getting into the weeds of all my conspiracy theories, but I am impressed that they were able to find Gabby's body as quickly as they did. And I think that it probably was not appropriate for Brian's parents to go searching. But I also understand at that point, that many weeks in, letting them participate, especially since they had not been charged with anything.
Yeah, I think, listen, if you have a missing child, you have the right to go search for them. Because from our outside understanding, they don't know where their son is. Their son is missing just like Gabby is. So Gabby's parents were allowed to be involved in her search. Brian's parents have the right to be involved in his. So I do
I know.
I know.
That's
It's just
probably
because we don't
true
like him. But I do
for
think it's
them.
kind of funny that if by fluke chance they did just happen to come across his body, I do think it's kind of ironic, maybe is a better word, that his parents found his body. That's
I
horrible.
just think
And I feel
the
bad saying
odds.
that. But like,
The
good. Your son murdered someone. I'm glad. Like, not that you
ugh,
deserve pain, but
well, that remains to be seen. But I just, to me, I'm skeptical that they're that good at search and rescue, and they're way better than the FBI and the police.
Yeah. I mean, part of it also, I think things can move around. So maybe they searched that and it wasn't there at the time. Hypothetically, that is possible.
For
I don't
sure. Could be
necessarily
possible.
believe that, but it is possible.
It is possible. Is it probable? I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts for this episode?
No, I think my final thought was that I think it's funny that his parents were the ones that found him. Which I just think is horrible, but I don't know, it kind of was weird to me. But I am also very glad that the Petito family was given the closure of finding her. They can put her to rest. They can start to heal, because it's a lot harder to heal when you don't have something tangible, I guess.
Well, it brings an end to the search phase, which had to be excruciating for all of them.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really my last thought. And he should have ditched the van. I guess that also would be there.
I know. I hesitate to give tutorials on how to get away with murder, but some of these things are just so obvious.
Right? Like, listen, watch any true crime and you probably could have figured that one out. He's just a slacker.
But you know what? He wasn't watching TV. He was out there hiking. That's his problem.
This is why hiking isn't good for you.
I only hike places where I still have cell service. I'm not going out into the middle of nowhere. So call me whatever, but this situation is not my situation by 1,000,000%. It's not relatable. Gabby is a little bit relatable to me. Brian, I do not understand, and it sounds like his life was horrible through his own choices.
I know. We got to find an earthy, crunchy friend who can give us insight. Maybe I'll ask around. We'll see what they say. All right. Well, here we are. Ready for episode 3?
I'm ready.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.